Hey everyone, welcome to Someone You Need to Know. I'm your host, Rashana Baldwin, award-winning journalist, powerful storyteller, and social architect. Each episode, we dive into the stories of trendsetters, change makers, and everyday heroes who are shaking things up and making a real difference. Get ready to hear the good news you won't find in the headlines, inspiring stories of people leaving the world better than they found it. Now, let's dive into someone you need to know.
I don't do a lot of shows. I was like, for Rashana, yeah, I got to do that. That's been my buddy. She's been doing housing forever.
J.R. Fleming, welcome to my podcast, Someone You Need to Know. We just jumped right into it. You are all the things. You're an anti-eviction campaign activist. You are an organizer, a human rights advocate. When I met you maybe 10 years ago, you had just got through protesting an organization we won't name that I, currently consult for, but you do all keeping people at the forefront of housing rights. What else does J.R. Fleming do? But before you even go there, how did you get started in this advocating, activism?
My sister was going through a thing with housing. You know, she had spoke out uh, at a UN event. So I technically was doing music and film production. And I agreed to do a song called Save Public Housing in Cabrini Green for the Coalition to Protect Public Housing and do some graphic design and some video work for them. You know, after doing that project, they invited me to DC with some of my artists to perform the song and get a look at what they be doing in terms of advocating. So I go up there, my sister go up there, testify before unofficial UN gathering, and she's retaliated against by the housing authority, the Chicago Housing Authority, and she's forced to leave, go to Atlanta. It kind of irritated me that they would retaliate in such a manner, one. And then two, when I was up in DC, I got to see the nuances of who really is fighting for housing for us, right? Particularly people of African descent in America. And when I noticed that it was 98% Black women, yeah, I had an issue. You feel me? Like, where are the brothers? And then the man I did see were European immigrant man or white man, who were doing most of the advocacy, and they were academics or organizers from out of town. So I wanted to do something about that. I wanted to make sure that Black man was playing a role in this. So I decided to join the Coalition to Protect Public Housing.
And how long have you been doing it?
Ooh-wee. Ooh-wee. 21 and a half years. 21 and a half years. Wow. Can't believe I just said that. 21 and a half years I've been doing this from fighting for homelessness and public housing to fighting for homeowners. So yeah, 21 and a half years.
So you do both the renters' rights, both anti-evictions, and also homeownership.
Yes. So part of my story was I started off fighting public housing, as I just stated, and fighting for the homeless community. And when the United Nations came here, the special rapporteur in 2008 by the name of Raquel Roney, 2009 to be correct, from the UN, that she was the special rapporteur on the right to adequate housing for the United Nations. And this was their second official mission to the United States. And I got to chair that mission to Chicago and be one of the co-chairs for the national mission that they took to 7 cities. She challenged me. She said that I was doing a lot of reporting on what the government was doing in terms of discrimination, but she challenged me not to discriminate. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, well, you only fight for public housing and homeless people, You should fight for everybody. When you want to be a human rights to housing advocate or an activist, you have to fight for everybody. And so part of that fighting entailed, okay, how do I really challenge myself to fight for other people, right? Because remember, I'm fighting for public housing. I'm getting to see the good, bad, and ugly of the housing world. And what I mean by that is that there was a time in Chicago when public housing was coming down and folks had to move out of public housing, and some communities did not want public housing residents coming to their community on Section 8. And some homeowners was, verbally and publicly objective to public housing residents moving into their community with Section 8. So that kind of set me, how can I say, at odds with some homeowners for about 5-7 years. So when the United Nations challenged me to fight for homeowners as well as the homeless people, I took on that activism to say, look, I can do better. I can help folks, right? From the homeless person to the homeowner, we're going to fight for housing, right? Because everybody's a paycheck away from being homeless. So that's how I end up fighting for homeowners.
Let's dig into that deeper, because you're talking about when the projects came down and individuals giving their vouchers to then go into live into these communities or go into the suburbs. How did it help or hurt those individuals as well as homeowners? Because now you have a voucher and you're told to go find a place to live. And how did that help or hurt our communities?
Well, that's a deep dive, right?
I
That
know.
is a deep
It's
dive.
a
It is a
historical,
dive.
give us a snippet, because it's a historical moment that changed the landscapes of our neighborhoods and
in our nation. Yeah, in our nation. So yes, the demolition of public housing in Chicago particularly was the largest overhaul and displacement of a people post-slavery. Listen, I say post-slavery. Let me say that again, right? A lot of folks was displaced, right? And so I often use this analogy when I talk about gang violence and the violence that we see today in the world with the war. There's all going to tie into what's going on in Ukraine, Israel, and Palestine. This is known as what we call territorial conflict. The displacement and demolition of public housing created a territorial conflict in the city of Chicago and in the African-American communities and other communities where Section 8 went. Here's what I mean. When you take a people and displace them, force them into other community, the community that pre-existed is going to feel like there's some infringement happening, that folks are coming to take over the neighborhood, that folks are coming to take over the community, that the dynamics and the nuances and the history of that community is about to change. And if you know any people, whether it be people of African descent, European descent, Latino descent, anywhere around the globe, when you have one group of people going into another group of people territory, it creates what we call a conflict. Particularly in Chicago and the world, these conflicts became armed conflict, right, with a lot of the violence. And it's some things that we don't want to talk about, but we have to. Allowing what we call the displacement of so many people was basically relocating poverty is what they did. They didn't displace, they didn't get rid of poverty, they just relocated the poverty. They just displaced the poverty. And it put it in communities where there was working African Americans, right? Communities where people tend to, how do I say it, have an vested interest in the community. That chain of events not only hurt our homeowners community, but it hurt the public housing in Section 8 community because it created an unnecessary rift and war. Again, another impact and detrimental effect of the tearing down of public housing was that you had to close public schools in the areas which public housing existed. So again, now you're not only displacing the parent, you're displacing the students who have to move into these new communities, get acclimated to a new school, and they lose 8 months of education. You just increased the violence in these communities because of the territorial conflict that was happening with the influx of public housing to community like Auburn Gresham, Roseland, Inglewood, Greater Grand Crossing, South Shore. So many communities was impacted by the public housing demolition that it made uneven the stability and unstable the stability that Black folks have built since the 70s and 80s. So yeah, I was really shocked that our city would take on such a massive overhaul of public housing without looking at the facts that, look, you're forcing people to places they don't understand. Now we talk about the city. Let's talk about the suburbs, right? And you get to hear some stories that I had to endure and listen to repetitively. There was an instance where they were moving African-American women who had maybe been 2, 3 generations in public housing, who never utilized or knew how to use a thermostat, right? And so a lot of people, they didn't have this training with the homes, and they didn't know how to work certain features in a home, right? So there was a process where that happened. They moved a lot of our people out to the suburbs in these communities where they not only had issues with the house and the upkeep of the property, but they had issues in transportation. One thing public housing offered was centralized transportation. So yeah, it was some issues. Just the list goes on and on and on. I summed it up by saying to the United Nations, nowhere in the world would they allow certain communities to be forced into another community where the armed conflict would happen. So to put it in international terms, I said, in Yugoslavia, you accused Slobodan Milosevic of ethnic cleansing. And they was blown away by my analysis. Well, in America, they're doing urban and economic cleansing. It might not be because of religion. It might not be because of race, but it definitely has a lot to do with economic cleansing. They're getting rid of these communities because the land was profitable and they can utilize it for higher incomes. And so we started making them comparison to the United Nations that, look, it's like moving Sunnis into Shiites community. You're going to have a conflict. You can't move a community that was full of gangster disciples into a vice lord neighborhood or a Black Keystone neighborhood and not expect gang conflict. You wouldn't send Palestinian children into Israel territory and Israel's children into Palestinian children territory because there would be conflict. It will put these children's lives at risk. And this is the analysis we tried to give Mayor Daley, Rahm Emanuel, and a lot of people at the housing authority in the city. Just because we Black, you cannot move us into Black communities like this if you don't know the background of the residents you're moving over there.
Similar to the school districts.
That's right, exactly similar. So we always said that the plan for transformation, which was the biggest overhaul of public housing in the city of Chicago, and Renaissance 2010, which was the education plan, that if you put them on top of each other, they were the same plan. You know, that the schools would close where you tear down public housing school developments, and these children would be displaced. And it's the same thing. And I even took the case of the children to the United Nations under the Conventions of the Rights to the Child, which states any adult person over the age of 18 that is responsible for the care of persons under the age of 18, which is defined as children, should ensure that these children have the full development and protection that the United Nations declared. Anybody who don't do that, it will be called an agent, right? And so we started charging, as you heard, genocide back in the early 2000s with the young kids, with the count of the school closed. He's saying, look, you're creating armed conflict areas and forcing children to go into them. You wouldn't send no other race of children into a war zone to get to school. Why are you doing this with ours? And people were getting blown away by my analysis. People were saying that I was overreaching, I was misinterpreting international law. And I just stated to them, I don't need you to interpret anything for me. Here's what I know to be a fact. One, when it comes to education, we overlook things, right? To the degree that when we look at how we protect our children, I had an issue with the ROTC program. Now, make no mistake, I'm a patriot. I love America, right? I love my people. But make no mistake, you know what I'm saying, there's no favoritism in my heart. So I say that to say this. When we talk about the warlords on the continent of Kemet, also known as Africa, right? We talk about child soldiers. You hear that word, child soldier. Children under the age of 18 forced to fight in these wars. Children under the age of 18 being trained for war. You hear this terminology used in Eastern Europe, child soldiers. You hear this terminology used in South and Central America, child soldier, and you hear it used in other regions. When the United Nations offered protection, it stated, no government, armed dissident group is allowed to recruit the children under the age of 18 for military practices and purposes. So when I charged that the United States ROTC program did just that, and that it was creating child soldiers, They tried to argue against it and then had to amend the law to allow for parents to sign their children up for ROTC. I brought up that fact to America because I wanted them to understand here it is that you can recruit a child for military purposes and practices at the age of 14, 15, and 16. Here's that you would say that any child under the age of 18 that's been used for wars should have international protection. The United States is one of the biggest advocates and enforcers of the Conventions on the Rights of the Child, making sure that children who were used in wars overseas receive full rehabilitation versus punishment, right? So I took the argument that, well, gangs recruit children under the age of 18. Do we protect these juveniles and rehabilitate them the same way we do child soldiers? Because I don't see a child as a gang member. I see them as a child soldier. And so when I started using international comparisons to speak to our issues in America, I think a lot of folks had issues, particularly that these same children was being displaced. These same children was being made homeless. And here in a country where we would militarily enforce the human rights to housing, education, and healthcare overseas, we do nothing to do it here. So I wanted to make a difference. I wanted our voice to be heard in a community that was listening, and that was the international community. So that's how I got into all of this. And the public housing laid the groundwork and foundation to everything I do today.
Well, April is the Fair Housing Month.
My favorite month.
Good to know, has the work have you done around anti-eviction campaign and land trust, are you carrying the legacy of the Fair Housing Act? For those who don't know, signed by President Johnson then to prevent discrimination off race and other characteristics to make it illegal. So is the work that you're doing carrying that legacy?
Definitely. I say that we took fair housing to another level. We not only believe that fair housing is preventing the discrimination based off race, class, gender, and these other issue areas, right? We believe that fair housing is having a right to have community control of development of our community, to have community control of the land in our community. And so a lot of the work I do around community land trust actually actualizes that belief, puts into practice that belief that there should be community control of housing for generations to come. And this is why I've been a strong proponent of the community land trust nationwide and locally, how I became the president of the board for the Chicago's on the Land Trust with Chicago Community Loan Fund, 7, 8 other, and it could be more because we're growing weekly, land trusts across the city of Chicago. This is why we formed a citywide collective of land trusts and began promoting that. This is why I worked with Bridget Gaynor to help create a Cook County land bank. A lot of people ask, where did the land trust and the land bank come from? And these are models that we were promoting: community land trust, community land bank. The county is a municipal land bank, right? Want to clear that up. We wanted the community to have control of residential and commercial properties. Cooperative housing models. These is what we was working on as an alternative to some of the work I was doing. And for those of you who don't know, the Anti-Eviction Campaign gained its fame in 2009, 10, and 11 by not only doing eviction blockades to prevent people from being evicted, by not only creating an eviction moratorium, we gained our fame for taking over extra legally vacant homes, fixing them up for homeless women and children. And these was homes that was owned by the bank that sat vacant in our community for 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And we decided as a community and an organization to answer the call of the human right to housing by becoming the enforcers of the human right to housing. As our government militarily enforces human rights across the seas in the world, we said that domestically, we will begin to enforce our human rights at home by utilizing we the people. And that's what we did. So our fame came from taking over vacant homes, fixing them up for homeless women and children. It gained so much notoriety that President Obama was talking about it, President Clinton. And there's clips on YouTube called the CAC promo that shows that. And it also gained us national notoriety by being featured as a cover story in the New York Times Magazine back in 2013.
Explain the anti-eviction campaign. Is it you are protecting against illegal evictions, or is it just, hey, I'm just going to take over this vacant property because I'm home and I have, according to the laws, I can be a squatter. Explain for those who may not know the actual specific work with the anti-eviction campaign.
So the anti-eviction campaign was not formed and started in America. It was actually started in Cape Town, South Africa, by a young man by the name of Ashraf Kassim and his community, who decided to build shacks and things of that nature in South Africa, Cape Town, South Africa. He came to America after the United Nations left for their visit and challenged me to stop whining to the world, as he called. I love that. Stop whining to the world about the issues that Black men, women, and children was having in America with housing, and that I should take on some of the practice from the people off the motherland versus the European doctrines I had been reading. And so I accepted his challenge. I just told him we wasn't going to be building those shacks in America. That's not going to work in Chicago, right?
Not with our
You can do
weather.
that. Not with our weather. Now, we ain't doing that. And so with that mindset, we organized at Cabrini Green. It's co-founded by a bunch of people out of Cabrini Green and across the city to say, what would an anti-eviction movement look like in Chicago? And so we started off saying that we were against economically motivated eviction, particularly in public housing, low-income communities, right? When the media would come to me, I used to joke. I joke a lot with people to try to make the analysis simple. When the media would come to me sometimes and ask, okay, you're doing eviction blockade. Do you not believe people should pay rent? And I'm like, I believe people should pay rent, but I know that rats, roaches, and raccoons live rent free. Ain't nobody tripping on collecting money from them. So what's wrong with a human being? Particularly an African American woman who I spent 9 months in her stomach rent free, 18 plus years in our household, rent free, then moved in with my sister, cousin, and then first wife's children mothers, all Black women. The last thing you think I should be able to provide for them, the first and last thing I should be able to provide for them before I leave Earth should be shelter. If a Black woman provided a shelter for me my whole life, how can I sit back and watch them tear down public housing? And you got to remember, this went on from 2000 to 2011 and 12. And still to this day, they're tearing down public housing. And if you remember 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12, there was a foreclosure crisis. So I was just like, damn, they're going to take the public housing from us, the Section 8 from us, and now you foreclosing on the Black folks who own the home, who was working, trying to do the right thing. So you just think you're going to keep on taking houses and we ain't going to do nothing. America, meet the Anti-Eviction Campaign. We will enforce the human right to housing, listen carefully, by any means necessary. And that's what we meant. So we thought that we was doing what was needed at the time instead of whining to the world, hey, it's a foreclosure crisis, public housing can help. Hey, you're taking away public housing when people need the housing. Hey, people are losing their job in the auto industry and getting foreclosed on. You think they need public housing. Like, here's all the reason to keep public housing going. Well, our organization said we would become a People's Housing Authority. Like the Chicago Housing Authority, we became the People's Housing Authority.
And
As
it's
an artist,
based on economics.
That's right. And it's based on economic. Now, I believe people who have the means to pay rent should pay rent.
I want to make sure that was clear because, people listening and watching, it's like, no, based on.
You have to pay rent but there should be an apparatus, a safety net in place for people to have housing, right?
And support and assistance, yeah.
That's right. But I don't believe people should just have the right to live rent free if they have the means of paying rent. Like when people say a squatters movement, I want to be clear, right? On the Illinois compiled statutes, we have acts called the Vacant and Abandoned Building Act. And this act allows for us to do the work we do. The act states plain and simple, if any property sit vacant more than 2 or 3 years, any two members of the community have a right to do an adverse possession. They must beautify this property, keep it up, and the house must be utilized for someone of low income. So that was the caveat for me, like, one, this is what we need to make these things happen. But I wanted to be clear to the world that, look, We were against economically motivated eviction as it pertained to foreclosures, right? Because the bank had did a lot of redlining. The bank had did a lot of how do we say it? Predatory lending, right? I want to use the correct terminology legally. The bank had committed multiple acts of fraud, and admittedly, they had did all of these things. Our government bailed out the banks under President Bush and then under President Obama with the American Recovery Reinvestment Act. And we said, here it is, the bank got bailout money from Bush. The bank got bailout money from President Obama. The bank got FDIC insured money for this house. The bank collected on insurance for this house. The bank got all of this money for this one house, and it didn't keep the homeowner in it. Now, Rashonda, I'm not the smartest man in the world, but it sounded like they got paid 4-5 times for that one house, and they were still putting out the Miss Jones, the Miss Johnson, the Miss Jackson. And Brother JR and the Anti-Eviction Campaign had enough of that. I stated vehemently to the United States government and to the banks at a meeting in D.C., a hearing on the bailout and the misuse of his funds, to a lot of bankers, that we knew a legal way to rob the bank without a gun and a note, that the judges control the courtroom, they control the bank, but we the people control the blocks, and we would have the last say so on what gets done with that vacant house. And that was the point we were trying to make to people, that these evictions were illegal, that was happening to a lot of homeowners, and that we the people had to step up. But you have to pay rent. If you have the ability to pay rent, pay rent. Because I've seen the good and bad of that, especially during COVID, you know.
So many stories, so many scams, so many
it was countless. You know, the biggest story of COVID, I tell people, is we worked with Congress to come up with the eviction moratorium. So not just locally with the sheriff, we worked with Congress to create the eviction moratorium nationally. And we worked to also ensure that we would have protection for homeowners and renters. And that's where we came up with the emergency rental assistance, which quote unquote is public housing dollars. No matter how people want to dress it up and fix it up, it's public housing money. Everybody who got emergency rental assistance, you got a public subsidy from a public fund, and you're technically in public housing.
So back to what we're talking about with, FHA month, Fair Housing Act month. We're in 2025. Where are we at now with the discrimination, housing discrimination? Has it changed? Is it getting better? Or what were you seeing in 2025? Is redlining occurring still? Has it gone away? Has it manifested into other faces?
I mean, in 2025, I would say that fair housing has shifted dramatically, right? I think we're not in such a horrific state as we were in the 1960s, right? But it still exists. Redlining still exists. Predatory lending still exists, right? Discrimination still exists, right? They just find different ways of doing it. One of the different ways they found post-COVID, let me be clear on this, post-COVID, since the world started watching post-COVID, was the increase in rent, right? Unnecessary increase. If you want to redline someone out your community, you don't want a certain racial group in the community, raise your rents, right? And now you hear this movement around the country called the rent's too damn high, right? Everybody's saying the rent's too high. Well, it's a form of keeping people out of the community. Redlining in a different phase, that the property is overvalued. Because they know you're not going to have the credit to qualify for an overpriced house, and that's a form of redlining. These are some of the tactics and practices that have helped some people get innovative and creative and keeping their discriminatory practices going.
I was shocked to hear that, rents are $1,800 on the South Side. You expect that in, I guess, more affluent neighborhoods. Back in the day, whenever back the day was, the downtown apartments. Okay, 1,800 if I get a view of the lake. I was like, on the South Side of Chicago, you can get a two-room. That's more than my mortgage. I was like, wow. Or you can get a home properties, a 2-flat in Inglewood, $450. I'm like, wait, is this Lincoln?
The same park? Yeah, it's just Albany Park. like where are we at? Bill McCragen? Like, where are we at? So one of the things we said to people were, Chicago doing this human rights work is a global city. Listen carefully.
Yeah.
If you ever, you do fashion, you do it very well, sister, by the way. You
I
do
don't
it
do that.
greatly.
I,
You,
thank you.
you
I
model, you
compliment.
model very well. Look, you do fashion and modeling very well. And
I
so
am not a fashion model. I am a former beauty queen, national beauty queen. I'll leave it there.
every time I see you modeling it with some type of fashion, I be like, is it a runway or just a meeting?
Thank you.
You're welcome. So you see these things, Los Angeles, New York, Paris, right? You used to see them hats, right? Chicago. I mean, you see LA, New York, Paris. These are the global cities, right? Well, Chicago is a part of that global city network now. And we warned people when we saw the signs go up in Chicago. It was called what? Building a new Chicago. And I beat up on Mayor Rahm Emanuel and Mayor Daley about calling it what it is, building a global Chicago. Just tell people what you're doing, right? You created this World Business Chicago. Let me say this again, World Business Chicago. Well, folks is not going to come here and do world business in Chicago. They're going to come here and live in Chicago. And Chicago became the residency for folks across the globe. As more corporations began to relocate to Chicago, more home buyers came to Chicago. One. Two, the tech influence in Chicago is here, as it was in San Francisco. From 800 to 8,000 is what folks said some neighborhoods saw the increase in rent. And so you try to figure out, well, who the hell can afford 1,800 on the South Side? Well, this global city don't want a lot of groups of people here no more. And so that's why the rents are rising like that. Is it fair housing? Do the people of America have a right to the city? And that's the question we've been putting on the American mindset and hope that they would look at the next 15 years as we did 15 years ago.
You helped to start the Cook County Land Bank and the pilot community land trust. How are the tools, that they have being used today to promote affordable homeownership and sustainable homeownership?
Well, I know that the Cook County Land Bank has been doing a better job of creating affordable home ownership. I know that from its inception and from our working with Bridget Gaynor in the county, there were certain mandates put in there in terms of community contractors being utilized, certain mandates that said if you got a property from the land bank, that you had to make it affordable. There was mandates put in place. It could be doing better in terms of community participation and community partnership, as always. Anything could. The same thing with the community land trust. I think the community land trust was the model we were able to show folks that, look, you have a way to buy a property. Now you can do it for economic reason to pull down the equity in it and pass it to your children, or you can put it in a community land trust, which ensures for 99 years that it will remain affordable to a family member or whoever you want to leave it to. And when we were doing the land trust, my thinking is always, how do I ensure that Bronzeville has a Black population 50, 60 years from here? How do I ensure that Washington Park, Hyde Park, all of these great Black communities have a population of our people 60, 70, 80, 90 years from now when we're gone, that our children will have access to this land? And so community land trusts offer that opportunity. There's pros and cons to it. The pros is if you want to have an existence in this city 50, 60, 70 years from now, the community land trust is the best model that we can have.
I want to shout out the former executive director, Rob Rose. I think he's doing some good work.
Man,
I think he's doing some good work. I've interviewed him about
one of the greatest,
during
one of
COVID.
the greatest to do it.
Absolutely. He was then the executive director. I'm happy to see brothers like him still teaching the people, still educating the people.
That's
I just
right.
took a class that he offered at your, not your, but one of your great organizations that you're a part of, CCLF, or, in realm or in spirit that you're a part of.
That's right.
offered a free workshop, and I'm like, I love that.
Oh,
Now I'm not a developer, but I signed up, so I'm like, I need to know all of this stuff, being in housing, being a consultant, working for different
mhm.
nonprofits in housing, and I was like, I got to have you back on for a follow up because it's been 3 years since Rob
Great
wrote.
friend of mine.
Yeah,
Great friend of mine.
so
You know what's crazy? I actually was one of the people that was begging him to take the job at the land bank,
really,
help put it together. Yes, he was
really,
at CCLF, remember? We were
right.
doing
He
work
was
together at
COO. He
CCLF.
was
That's right, the chief operating officer. And I knew that, and he came from the banking world. So I knew that Rob was over there at the Cook County Land Bank. A lot of the vision that I had for the land bank and our organization had would come to fruition. I know that he would be able to direct people to the right resources, and it would be a fail-safe program. Now, everybody knows the media in Chicago is rough, and I'm always say this when I say Rob Rowe's name. He got a bad deal. It's the reason why I hate Chicago politics, right? And that was the biggest mistake ever made at the county land bank was letting Rob Rose go, and I would stand on that to the end of time. I don't think you would. I praise the sister that's over there, but the amount of knowledge and talent and relationships and network that he had, that could have been that was so beneficial to the buyers of the land bank, not just to the county land bank, but to the buyers, right, and the public. You know, the knowledge and skill sets that he offers, it's unmatched. It's unmatched, hands down, it's unmatched. And that's why I always know he was the best man for the job. And he always had my support. That brother will always have my support. And I appreciate his service in the housing and the development world, as well as the financing world.
and he will definitely be back on my podcast too. Can you give us a one sentence for those who don't know? Because my podcast is all over, it's global. What is the
Mm.
Cook County Land Bank, if you can sum it up in a sentence or two?
Cook County Land Bank is a municipal entity formed by the Cook County government that allows for it to take hold of tax distressed properties, vacant and abandoned properties. And let me just say it like this: my organization, people always like, "Why did you do that? Why would you work with Bridget on a land bank?" Well, people don't know, we were accused of taking over 50 to 500 homes in Chicago. Who knows what the county is, and thousands nationally, right? And at the time, I think we were at house number 39 when I had realized, and this white folks, black folks, Latino, everybody taking over our house. And I had realized it was like 68,000 vacant homes. So in Chicago, there were 68,000 vacant homes. And I was like, wow, I'm not going to be able to take over. We can't take over all these homes. Like something else got to give. So the land bank offered that opportunity. What a lot of people don't know is the city had a land bank that was defunct, right? And the city had a program known as receivership in
Yeah.
which they could address the vacant properties by taking them. They just had nowhere to bank them, nowhere to place them, right? And it would have created a bunch of work. Because the county has the ability to remove the taxes, it made sense to do it on the county level.
Yeah.
And so working with Bridget Gaynor, studying, the Wayne County Land Bank and land banks in Michigan, looking at models, we were able to put together a land bank and advocate for it effectively. The purpose of the land bank, again, though, is to be a benefit to the community, not the government, the community, right? And this is why I backed a municipal land bank when I told you I was working on a community land bank. And the government made more sense because they had the resources, And so the land bank is basically supposed to hold these properties and then distribute them through community-friendly and community-minded developers, right? That is the purpose for the land bank. It's to take these tax heavy properties and put them in a system in which you can get them back to the tax roll and make them purposeful, right? The purpose of the land bank is to reduce not only the residential blight, but the commercial blight within the county, right? And this is the purpose of the land bank, or what we sought to do. What we wanted to see more of, though, is a partnership with community housing groups, community development corporations, chambers of commerce, right? And that way we would be able to tackle the residential issues that's what's impacting our community and the closed commercial corridors that are having a detrimental impact on the property valuations in African-American communities.
You're everywhere, JR. You talked about advocating on a global level, a local level, on a county level. What are you currently doing in the White House? I'm seeing you federally doing stuff. You know, very bravely and very boldly working with this current administration of President Trump. Many people may look and, turn their heads, but what are you doing on a federal level?
My first go around with President Trump and his administration, and
I
I
know.
get to clear the air on that. I want to clear the air on that. So, we worked with President Obama. It started with President Obama when he put together what is known today as RAD, Demonstration for Public Housing. When I first began engaging government, because I was anti-policy, I was super Mr. Protest, all that land bank, land trust. That one, to all that policy, pen writing. That's not my cup of tea. I like to protest, agitate, organize, agitate, educate. And working with President Obama, we started with the Preserving, Enhancing, and Transforming Rental Assistance, PETRA, right? That later became TRA, known as Transforming Rental Assistance. And that became Rental Assistance Demonstration to this day, right? And that's the streams of how public housing get funded, right? That's when I first began engaging the White House. It was Valerie Jarrett and Michelle that encouraged me to do that, right? Go toward the policy side. And I'm going to shout out somebody else, a brother by the name of Anton Seals, who's working for Bobby Russ's office, had encouraged me to play the Hill a little more. And that's why I would end up meeting Maxine Waters, Senator Chris Dodd, Barney Frank, and I would start to begin working the Hill for policy. Then President Trump won. I got to work under him, work with his administration through Dr. Ben Carson, doing some housing and policy advisement to him, working with him to show him where our synergies were. That was the first Trump administration, as well as President Trump, current one of his advisors, Director of Minority Outreach, Lynn Patton, who was his senior advisor at the White House the first term. And she would later become the head of New York HUD, Housing and Urban Development, right? So that was my first go around with President Trump. Then there became President Biden. I worked with his administration and Kamala to do a lot of stuff around eviction prevention and rental assistance, creating affordable rental assistance, right? I just recently worked with them on that. And so this administration go back around. I had the honor to be a guest at the White House for Black History Month. Didn't attend, instead chose a meeting with the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Secretary Scott Turner, to get his insight on what this administration focus would be coming up and how we can better work together and prepare our community to receive resources that would help us in housing. Now, I know a lot of people turn to here, you working with, I work with any president. I work with Republicans and Democrats. In fact, I'm about to do, I did a public housing caucus. Funny story, right? Right after meeting with Secretary Turner, I was given an invitation to participate in the public housing caucus launch by Representative Cleaves out of Missouri, right? So I did some work with them around the public housing caucus. We're doing some work with them. And just the other day, I received the invitation for Congressman Jonathan Jackson to participate on a panel around housing called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, a DEI panel, as he chaired the DEI committee. And one of the things he said was, be smart. Like, you got to work with both sides if you want to get something done. We see what you're doing. And he joked like, I can get a meeting with the secretary. You got one. That's a good thing, And I take that, wholeheartedly. Like, I know my responsibility. I know my job is to serve the people. I live by oath. I won't interject my personal, fraternal, religious, or political, right, views when doing the work for the people, right? I won't compromise the people because I don't like somebody, right? Or I disagree with somebody, or somebody else don't like somebody. I do the work to be effective and to get results. It's not about fame and fortune. It's to get results, right? I do this work, Rashada, because I'm a father of 13 children. I tell people this all the time.
13
I'm not trying to be a deadbeat.
children.
13 biological children. This is why
I was a Rolling Stone. Wow.
No,
okay, let me ask you this question.
Stayed around. But I want to get to this point. I do this work to make this world a better place for our children to inherit, to ensure that we have better housing models than the ones I've seen and inherited at my time. That's why I do this work. So I do this work and work with anybody because my organization mandate is enforcing the human right to housing by any means necessary, even if that means work with the Republicans and the Democrats and the people I don't agree with all the time.
What can you share, since you had that meeting with the housing secretary, what is their current agenda for housing, for affordable housing? And should people of color be concerned with what we're hearing in the media and seeing, I guess, cutbacks with DEI and HUD? So those two questions. What can you share that they came out of that meeting in terms of what their agenda is for housing? And should there be concerns with what we're hearing about the, cutbacks and, restrictions with DEI?
I mean, so I'm gonna go straight to it. I would tell people the cutbacks that people are talking about is not in terms of funding for public housing in Section 8. Go look at the facts, right? Go look at, you'll see that there is some increase in funding in Section 8 and public housing, right? In some particular areas, right? This administration does have a focus on utilizing opportunity zones and pushing home ownership programs, right? Again, like I said, every administration works differently. Some focus on public housing, low-income housing, some home ownership, right? Some both. I believe this administration is going to do both. I tell people, look at the numbers, right? Don't always go with the media and the internet and say, go to the HUD website, go to the congressional appropriation, go look at the numbers and be a judge for yourself. In terms of DEI cuts and things of that nature, I want to be clear, right? I want to be clear when I say this, right? Some of the things that happen on the federal level, I had begged to happen way before President Trump was even thought of. I'm talking about during the Obama administration. You got to remember, I come from public housing. I've seen the misappropriations and misallocations of federal funds that was supposed to go to Black folks, right? And it went to other folks because of their ability, right, to manipulate the term diversity, equity, and inclusion, or because their ability to manipulate the word and minority, or their ability to manipulate a program, particularly to manipulate a program that was meant to assist those in public housing like Section 3. So I come from a place where I wanted to see the government finally do an audit of itself, right? To see the wasteful spending that was going on. I mean, in public housing alone, we was once promised 2,500 jobs. We got 40. In public housing alone, there was so much money that came down to help resident-owned businesses and Section 3 businesses, young African-American men and women get into trade program. It never matriculated. What happened to the money, right? I'm a person that said that the government need to be accountable to the people. I should have a say-so on what my tax dollars are going to. Now, I'm not one for people to lose their jobs and things of that nature, but at the cost of taking the cost of housing up, yeah, I think that some of those positions need to go, right? I believe that this government has done enough wasteful spending for generations to come. And at some point, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat doing it, I think we should applaud the fact that the government is auditing itself, whether it be political or not. I'm happy, that we can get to the crux of these misappropriations and misallocations of federal funds. Now, I've heard all of the stuff about the 100-year-old, 150-year-old people receiving Social Security. I want to hear the numbers around housing, how housing was abused, right? I bear witness to a time in 2010, Rashana. Because of fair housing, I have to be careful how I say this, right? But I say this because I know they violated fair housing. During the foreclosure crisis, I watched people who were being foreclosed on it skip the line and go to the top of the list to receive Section 8. Remember that part where I was advocating, well, once the homeowner get foreclosed on, they ain't got a job, then they need Section 8. Remember, they need public housing. Well, what was happening during 2009, 10, and 11, a lot of them homeowners and folks who became homeless because they lost their job went ahead of the Black people that were on the wait list for Section 8, 3, 5, 7, 10, 15 years. I know you heard the story of how long people been on Section 8 wait list. And yeah. I was going like, wow, how did that the homeowners get to jump the line? And they just had a whole house. They didn't want Section 8 in their community. Remember that part? So I'm looking at it through a lens that most people don't see. You're the same group of people, some of you who didn't want Section 8 in your community. Now you believe you have a right to jump the list to get a Section 8 voucher. You know, so I wanted the government to be accountable to that. Let's take a look. Let's take an audit on how these things are happening. And let's kill the wasteful spending. Now, I don't agree with everything this administration doing, but to this day, I haven't seen a detrimental impact in terms of housing. And from my conversation with the secretary, you got to excuse me, I'm in a unit right now, rehabbing one, getting it ready for affordable housing, right? You know, to this day, I haven't seen any detrimental housing impact. I've seen a lot of, how can you say, job cuts that some might say might impact the way funding is streamed. I heard a lot of possibilities of what some of these, you know, cuts could do to the community. But right now, to this day, I haven't seen a direct or detrimental impact from housing yet in my city, right? Now, I have seen and heard that the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois, being a sanctuary city, might lose a lot of federal funding, right? And that's what we are. That's why I'm doing my best to maintain a relationship with this administration, both the Republicans and Democrats, to say, okay, if this happens, what is an alternative, right? If you're not going to fund the government because of the sanctuary city status, can I help position members of our community in the private sector to receive some of the resources so that our people who can suffer no longer, we're not in a position to suffer any longer, can receive some resources, right? You know, like I said, again, I heard a lot of what might be impacted. I haven't seen it on the housing front. I know healthcare wise, last week we lost 125 million of some COVID money. Again, my only wish is that there's an alternative. If we are to lose money, how can I help organize the private sector to ensure that our community don't suffer as hard as we traditionally would suffer?
Staying on this topic, I have one follow-up question about the federal level with the CDFIs because it's concerned. They have concerns. They've been, you know, it's come up that they'll lose funding and how they do their, you know, homeownership, down payment assistance. Should they be concerned? You know, we just named a couple CDFIs who rely on some government, federal money, and they can't rely on the bank, but they were turning to the government for funding. Should they be concerned? What should they be doing, watching, hearing? What advice would you give or offer since you're in close communication with, you know, this administration? Which I think is a good idea to, you know, work with all of the presidents, you know, don't isolate yourself.
Again, I would tell all of these CDFIs and those who benefited from what we know as the Community Reinvestment Act, right? To look at the policy of this current administration federally and adhere to it, right? There's a term, no sense of poking the bear, right? No sense of cutting off your nose to spite your face, right? And no sense of saying we all should suffer to make a political point, right? One of my disappointments is the political posturing right now being done by a lot of folks across this country, both Republicans and Democrats, right? Mm-hmm. Because it put the people in a sad situation, right? But particularly in the state of Illinois, truly disappointed that our state would dust there, you know, and I'm, as a person who does human rights, again, I talked about territory infringement, right? In the beginning about moving people from one place to another. But it's not racial in Chicago and what the public feelings are towards the migration that's happened, not just from the South American, Venezuelans, Colombians, Hondurans, but it's the Ukrainians and Chinese as well who is coming to our city, right? I think the public, there's been a strong public outcry, right? Directed at the Venezuelans, not so much at the refugees, right? The Ukrainian, the 38,000 plus refugees we got from Ukraine. I think my issue is in federal in terms of funding. I think the CDFI should just really, I'm going to say this again, adhere to what this administration wants. No sense of poking the bear. And as it pertains to is there money? I think there's enough money out there, right? I just think it's what our priorities are with the money. I think that comes into question, you know. There's going to be a crisis every other day, right? We learned that with COVID. We learned that with the migrants, right? It's how we prioritize things that creates the issues for us, right? And so I'm always be a firm believer that, look, men lie, women lie, numbers don't, right? Before President Trump took office, you know, the city alone, the state alone, almost $1 billion towards helping migrants. This was the same money that people in public housing, forgive me, we're working in the house. This was the same money that people in public housing said you could have utilized to redevelop Robert Taylor. You remember that strip of land down the State Street corridor? Mm-hmm. This is the same money that you could have utilized to redevelop Cabrini Green, right? And it could have been a community, both of these communities could have been communities and redevelopment project that could have incorporated everybody into it, the migrants, the refugees, and the public housing people that was on the waiting list. So now what we do is how we do it. And again, that would be my message to the CDFIs. It's not what you do, it's how you do it. It's not what you say, it's how you say it with this administration. You know, if this is an administration that do not want to hear DEI, come up with the buzzwords that they want to hear. If your end result is to have a result, then do whatever it takes to get the result you're looking for. And as for me, my results are going to be the same. My advocacy is going to be the same, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. I'm going to find out where we can work with these folks on, and we're going to put some focus around that. If the next 4 years, this administration is strictly about home ownership, then I gotta do some pivoting around home ownership, make sure I'm doing enough organizing in that area.
Okay. I know, you know, your time is precious. I got maybe 1.5 left questions. Specifically, you brought up the topic of home ownership, moving back to specific home ownership and young people feeling priced out. What are some steps, practical tools, programs, advice that you would give to individuals, young folks feeling priced out? I don't want to invest, it's too much. I don't know if becoming a home buyer is a reality for me. What would you say? What advice, what tools, what?
I mean, the first advice I would give them, I would ask them to look at their rent versus the mortgage, right?
$1,800.
So exactly. So I actually did this with the Secretary Carson and Turner. The housing authority, the federal government would spend $1,000 a month to subsidize a one-bedroom. That's $1,000 a month times 12 months, $12,000. In 10 years, that's $120,000. In 20 years, $240,000. In 30 years, the average loan is 30 years, $360,000 the government would spend for a Section 8 certificate. The people of the United States will spend $1,500 a month, right? In 10 years for rent, that's $150,000. In 20 years, that's $300,000, right? In 30 years, that's $450,000 somebody would spend in 30 years renting a unit that they could have owned in 10 years. So I think it become a mathematical. My approach to this generation is don't make mathematical sense, right? It's cheaper to own than it is to rent. It is actually cheaper to own than it is to rent right now. And that's the analogy I try to make for folks, showing them how much money they're overspending. But then you also got to realize our people are a nomadic people. This generation is nomadic. They like to go from place to place. To own a home means I'm going to anchor down for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years and call this home in a community. So you have to accept the fact that this is going to be my community. And I don't think a lot of people is ready to make that commitment. I see that's one of the things, issue areas that we don't touch on in home ownership, to why this generation is not buying home to the degree the last generation, because they're a very nomadic generation. They're a very move around generation to no fault of their own. You know why? Because their parents were moved around and their relatives, whether it was public housing, Section 8, or home ownership because of the foreclosure crisis. But we're working on some things. One of the things that we're doing as an organization, we mandatory a minimum $15,000 to $20,000 of equity in every home or condo that we sell, rehab or not. We save the borrower $20,000 to $30,000 if they're doing affordable rentals. If the investors buying it from us or our partners are buying homes to do affordable rentals, we save them anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 so that can be exchanged in rent. And as you know, and I know, rent's too damn high. 500 times 12 months is $6,000, right? So if I save you $20,000 in purchasing a house from me, I know that at least for a year, you'll be able to subsidize your rent and keep it affordable. So that's some of the programs that I'm building out and working on for those who buy homes from me.
Okay. What gives you hope that fair housing, and affordable homeownership can not just become a legal right, but a reality for all? And where can we find more information about what you're doing?
I ain't in nobody business what I'm doing. No, we stop.
You just talked about what you're doing.
I know. Like I don't want to be bothered by people. Don't want to be stopped. We're on Facebook, Chicago Anti-Eviction Campaign, www.chicagoantieviction.org. Forgive me for not updating the website. When you out here, what my sons and them say, when you're in these trenches, when you're in these streets, getting the work done in the field, it's kind of hard to keep the website, but we're going to get it updated to show a lot of our sales and housing, rehab projects, things of that nature, and some of the things we've been doing. One of the things I pride myself on right now is doing Hood for Humanity. Like you heard of Habitat for Humanity, we doing Hood for Humanity, where we got guys who got construction company training young guys in the hood. So we working on some project that I'm about to launch real soon that shows what we're doing with these young folks in terms of rehab and housing.
What gives you hope that this will become?
I just Hood for Humanity, like the guys giving back. This is what gives me hope. Us getting creative. I'm working with a lot of folks, people like NHS. I'm working with NHS now, working on a partnership with them. I already got a partnership with CCLF, the land bank. Building these collectives give me hope. But what gives me a lot of hope is our young folks. I'm seeing so many young folks in the trades. I'm seeing so many young folks doing these, what do you say? I'm seeing so many young folks doing these businesses, right? And getting acclimated to the world. I know it's only a matter of time before they jump on housing the way this is. So I'm giving hope by young folks. As always, I'm an older, not an elder. But folks like you, like y'all all give me hope. Like, believe it or not, when I see y'all, like 10 years, sister still at it. Now we gonna be all right. We gonna be all right.
Thank you, J.R. Fleming. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, it's not going to take some of us, but it's going to take all of us, right, to make this world a better place. It shouldn't be a job. It shouldn't be an ask. It should be a call to duty and a responsibility that we, the people of the United States, should be making this world a better place for the next generation to inherit by starting at home, starting in our community, and being the example we want other people to be. So I appreciate you. Thank you for all that you're doing. Glad to be a part of your show.
Thank you. Thank you.